Hey everyone, this is a rundown of exam one, which tested modules 1 through 3 from Commercial Society. Um, let's get right into it. So I'm just going to go through the question and talk about the justification for each of these 30 multiple choice, why that's the correct answer, maybe point out why the others are the incorrect answers. And then for extended response, we will go through it on the screen. All right. So number one, voluntary trade will always result in which of the following? The answer for this is going to be B. Trade creates value for both parties. So the one caveat for trade to even take place, both parties must believe that this trade makes them both better off. Nobody is going to take part in a voluntary trade if they think this trade is going to make them worse off. So the number one caveat for voluntary trade will always result in creating new value for both parties, okay? Number two, throughout history, how has the natural state of human life evolved? We know that we talked a lot about this at the beginning of commercial society, where we know we began the beginning of time in isolation, as cavemen, as nothing was, we did not have a modern society. We started off as Neanderthals, and then, or from cavemen to Neanderthals to this Iron Age, this Bronze Age. So we know that poverty, subsistence farming, and isolation evolved into this society with institutions, trade, and cooperation. So that's kind of honestly the overarching theme of this entire modules 1 through 3, that because of certain institutions, because of trade, because of cooperation, society has been able to advance over time, okay? What is the main role of an institution? So an institution is not to tell individuals what they should produce. It's not to exclude people. It's not to ensure that everyone receives a fair share. The main role of institutions is to help coordinate expectations, feasibility, and desirability for whatever goods, whatever services within that institution. So bringing people together because of an institution, we know these people have common beliefs of some sort, common expectations, and an institution brings people of the same caliber for whatever it is together, brings them together, and decreases these transaction costs of creating these expectations, creating these laws, creating what is desirable for this institution, okay? So we know that is the main role of that institution. Number four, society's legal structure is one example of an institution. What is the main contribution of this legal structure? So last question had a solution, let's go back to it, to ensure all individuals receive a fair share. So this is not the main role of institutions. Institutions may play a hand in ensuring that everyone receives a fair share, but this is not the main goal of an institution. So when we ask about a society's legal structure, what is the main contribution of this institution? So for this, once again, as an institution, a legal structure brings people together and it kind of writes out what is desired, what is feasible, what is expected of people in society. So a legal structure is an institution because from the contribution of law, we know that people know how to act. We know that people know how to treat one another. We know that there are repercussions to our actions and people enforcing these laws, this legal structure. So once again, the main contribution is just that this law is establishing an expectation for what happens when we desire that behavior, what happens when we have undesirable behavior. 5, what developed or what changed over time that enabled trade to develop? We know each of these choices, secured property rights, coinage, and language, have all helped us move forward in this kind of modern society of trade. So we know secured property rights allows people to, one, refuse a trade. It protects individuals' goods. Two, coinage is going to make transaction much easier between parties, and language is so important to be able to communicate the value, to be able to negotiate, bargain back and forth and whatnot. So all of these options have helped enable trade over time. All right, number 6, having secured property rights mean that individuals can do what? Once again, these secured property rights, once we kind of set an expectation for property rights, once we as a society came out and said, okay, if individuals have certain rights to their own goods, to their own services. So these secured property rights ensured that individuals had that security, that protection, okay? And in that case, when we are provided that protection through property rights, we don't have to be worried about looting, about pirates, about people coming in and robbing us, because we know that there are repercussions that go through whatever the legal rules of that society. But these secured property rights mean that I'm able to fully believe that I can refuse a trade, and I have the expectation that my goods are still protected under these property rights, okay? 7, we incur opportunity costs whenever we do what? So this is easy. Opportunity cost comes with every choice we make. Anything we do, any kind of choice we make in our own lives, in our day-to-day lives, we are incurring some type of opportunity cost. So we know that opportunity cost is going to be the value of that second or that highest foregone alternative. So anytime we make that choice, that number one foregone alternative is always going to be that incurred opportunity cost. Okay, so number 8 talks a little bit more about that idea of opportunity cost. Okay, so saying instead of going to the WVU football game on Saturday, I could use my time doing other things, such as reading a book, going to lunch with a friend. The opportunity cost of going to the football game is what? So we said the opportunity cost that an individual incurs is going to be that highest foregone alternative. So because I don't know how much I value reading a book or going out to lunch with a friend, it's going to be whichever is valued more in this case. All right. Number 9, and if you have any questions with just the idea of opportunity cost, there are plenty of videos out there on the internet. At this point, we should understand why the answer for number 8 is C, okay? So which of the following examples best represent the definition of transportation cost? So when we as economists talk about transportation cost, we are talking about any cost it takes to get my product, my good, my service from one party to the other, from producer to consumer. So any costs I incur while doing that are going to be considered these transportation costs. So bargaining and negotiation costs, those could be costs that I incur while going through that negotiation process, that bargaining process in the beginning with a supplier and a demander. Packaging costs, shipping costs, enforcement in order to secure my items, to protect my goods. So all of these examples represent transportation cost. All right, so number 10, institutions help individuals do what? Establish mutual expectations. All right, so we know that avoiding interaction, that's silly. Institutions bring people together. They bring interaction, they don't avoid interaction. It's not compete with their competitors. That's silly. Find the best deals, also very silly. We know institutions bring people with the same common goal, same common beliefs, whatever it may be, brings them together and establishes that mutual expectation. All right, number 11, the market price of a good reflects which of the following? So we talked about this idea of market price reflecting that marginal value of that the value places on one additional unit, okay? So we talked about the idea of this with the bottle of water at a baseball game. So each bottle of water purchased is at that market price, it's going to be the value that as a whole, the community places on one more unit of that good. Okay, so because these goods are being sold as per unit items, as this water bottle is being sold as one water bottle, that market price is going to reflect the value of that marginal cost, that marginal value. All right. Adam Smith believed that markets had the potential to do what? So B is the answer for this. We know that in the time of kings and queens and hierarchy, where people were serfs and there was much starvation, there was poverty, there was large scale sickness, illness, whatever it may be, Adam Smith believed that free markets would be able to bring society together as a whole, and we wouldn't have this hierarchical order kind of in society. Free markets actually allow people to bring what they believe is valuable to the table, to the market, and it allows everybody the same opportunity, the same chance to kind of supply something that is valued, supplied something that somebody would offer money, would value in return for that. So Adam Smith believed that these markets were able to take this subsistence farming, this serfdom where people were just treated terribly, and it would free individuals from this because of the power that free markets have, okay? Number 13, which of the following best describes the slope of a production possibilities curve? So we know a PPF is going to look something like this. PPF is going to look something like this. So it's going to slope downwards and it's going to bow outwards as well and then come inwards. So this is because of diminishing marginal opportunity cost as we go up in production. So we know that this slope and this bowed out curve is going to tell us that, it also should be slopes downward because of opportunity cost, not slopes upwards. Sorry about that. So anyways, it does slope downward because of those opportunity costs. Once again, as I give up more and more of good Y for good X, I'm losing more and more, okay? So each X I give up for Y, it's going to decrease at an increasing rate. It's decreasing at an increasing rate. So it is sloping downward because of those opportunity costs, all right? Let's clear those. All right, number 14, a technological, and just to be clear, this answer is A for this question. 13 should be A. All right, so continuing with that PPF, a technological innovation will cause a PPF to do what? So in this case, I'm going to draw out that PPF that we would see. So we have this original curve where I know with my given inputs, I can make any bundles of goods X and Y in a two good society. I can make any bundles within this PPF. A technological innovation now will allow me to make more goods at each allocation. So that means my curve is going to move outward that way. So it's expanding or shifting outwards in this way. It'll go out. All right, let's clear those. All right, next slide. So we know it is shifting outwards because at each given unit of inputs, I can produce more and more with that increased technological innovation. Right, 15, if a country is producing an allocation represented by a point inside its PPF, this indicates what? So I'm not even going to draw this one out. This one is pretty straightforward. We know that any point within a PPF, any country producing at a point within the PPF is using its resources inefficiently. unless we are right on that curve, right on that outside curve, we are not maximizing our output, okay? So we know B at this point is going to be our answer. Number 16, someone has a comparative advantage relative to their partner, which of the following must be true? So this comes right in the definition of comparative advantage. The definition of comparative advantage tells us that in order for an individual to have this comparative advantage, they must be able to produce at a lower opportunity cost. Therefore, B is our answer here. So we know somebody with a comparative advantage is going to be able to produce the same good, the same quality, the same quantity at a lower opportunity cost, meaning they're giving up less in order to produce this good. All right. 17, why do individuals thrive in a group more than they would in isolation? This lends kind of a little more evidence towards that idea that we went from this hierarchical society to kind of a free market society, a society where we work together, we trade, we have cooperation. We kind of moved away from this subsistence farming and from this idea of being self-sustaining, because everybody can be made better off when we work together. That is the beauty of coming together as a society and cooperating. Everybody is going to be made better off at a magnitude higher than they would ever be in isolation or in being self-sustaining, okay? Number 18, comparative advantages are a result of what? So this is just going to be comparative advantages. Once again, it's going to be when someone can produce at a lower opportunity cost. So this is a result of differences in endowment, skill, and ability. It's not going to be differences in income and wealth. That is going to talk about differences in income and wealth is change in capital, a technology innovation is going to be, it's going to increase our production, but it has nothing to do with comparative advantage. And then differences in management skills, that's just silly once again. So we know that different skills people have, different abilities. So I talk about this idea that everybody kind of specializes in their own fields in college. So if I were to specialize what maybe you guys' major was, my opportunity cost is a lot higher to go in and learn a whole new topic when my skills and abilities are here in economics, okay? So comparative advantages are going to be a result of those differences. All right, number 19, which of the following choices is the main goal of specialization? Let's talk about this one a little bit. To break this down, our main goal of specialization is B, to lower opportunity cost of production. So when we specialize in certain things, that is because we might have a comparative advantage. So when we have comparative advantages, that might lead to more specialization. Specialization means that we are going to almost kind of break up the production process. And within breaking up that production process, everybody is going to have one job that they are just so good at and do all day, every day. And that main goal of specialization, when somebody does this day in, day out, they become so good at this one small task in this large line of production that this is the main goal of specialization. Overall, we're trying to lower that opportunity cost of producing our good. All right. Number 20, Adam Smith believed which of the following was true in regard to division of labor. Adam Smith was one of the first ones to come out and say, hey, this idea of a free market, if people were to divide their labor, if we were to specialize, break up production and put on this large scale production, it kind of in the idea that like, in regard to the division of labor, we can kind of think of maybe breaking down that production process and creating 6 factories to produce one good. So when we do something like that, we know productivity is going to increase dramatically. So in that case, when everybody has one small job that they can do so quickly and so well, we are obviously going to increase that productivity when we're doing that, okay? There are other drawbacks to the division of labor, I'm sure, and we can name them. Adam Smith named them, but he did believe that the division of labor would dramatically increase this productivity. All right, 21, the law of demand tells us which of the following. So the law of demand is just the idea that my demand curve, when I have price on my y-axis and quantity on my x-axis, my demand curve is downward sloping. This is my law of demand. So my demand curve slopes downward because of that negative relationship with price. As price increases, the quantity demanded decreases. So when I start at a price really low, I have a quantity that's very high. Then when I go to a price that's very high, go over to the demand curve, and the quantity demanded of that is a lot lower when the price is higher. So that's my law of demand right there. Just saying that that relationship between price and quantity demanded is going to be negative. All right, moving on to 22. When the price of a good changes, which of the following occurs? There's going to be a movement along the demand curve. So we could also draw this one out. The big thing to know in this, for this question, is that when the price changes, we are not automatically seeing a curve shift. We don't always see that curve shift, or as a result, a curve shift is not always the result of this change in our market. So in this case, we have an equilibrium right here, and this is just supply and demand. This is just a quick sketch to show you what happens when that price changes. So when my price goes up, so my equilibrium price is right about here. When my price goes up, I'm now at a point up here on my demand curve. And now I'm also at a point over here on my supply curve. And I know my quantity demand and quantity supply do not equal. So now I'm shifted out of disequilibrium, or I'm shifted out of equilibrium into disequilibrium as well. All right. And then I can also show when my price drops. So when I have a low price, so price low, I end up here on my supply curve and here on my demand curve. So because of that price change, I see that my points on this demand curve are, there is movement along this curve. The curves themselves are not moving at all whatsoever. It's the points along these curves that are changing, okay? So that is the big goal of this question, to get you to understand that it's not always going to be a curve shift. There is also, in some cases, just movement along these quantity demanded and quantity supplied curves. All right, 23, how do you calculate the market demand of a good? So I remember we did an example of this where I said we had 3 producers and we looked at their individual demands. So I have demand, oh, oops, yep, demand 1, demand 2, demand 3. And so in order to find my market demand, all I'm going to do is add together each of these demand curves. So first at point, let's say at 0.5, whatever it may be. What I'm going to do is add together each of my quantities at 5. So let's just say this demand curve has a quantity of 4. This demand curve has a quantity of 6, and this demand curve has a quantity of 3. So what I would do is add these together. 3 plus 4, 7, 7 plus 6, 13. So at 0.5 on this graph, on my market demand graph, at 0.5, when price is equal to 5, I'm going to add all these demands together. And once again, I'll be at 0.13. So I'll do that for every different price bundle. So I'll go up and down this y-axis because this is price. And I'll do that for all these different prices. And then it'll help me map out this demand curve, okay? So that is how we find market demand when we have individual households, firms, whatever it may be. All right, so an increase in the price of a good leads to the increase or to an increase in what? Once again, when we have this increase in price, we are not shifting curves necessarily. We are seeing, so we have our original equilibrium here. All right, so when the price increases, what happens? When my price is increased, I am now here on my demand curve, and I am now here on my supply curve. So I know at this point that my supply, my quantity supplied has increased. I was originally here. When my price increases, my quantity supplied is now up here. So the choice for number 24 is C, and that is why. But like I said, when we see that increase in price, we want to draw that out and show what's happening. And then from there, we can go through these choices. So the supply of a good. Do we see any increase in the supply curve? Answer is no. Do we see any increase in the demand? Answer is no. And then do we see an increase in the quantity demanded? So that's a good question because we can check that right here in our quick drawing. So our new quantity demanded at that high price is going to be wherever that high price lands on our demand curve. And we know this quantity demanded is actually lower than our original quantity demanded at this point right here. So the only answer that makes sense here is going to be C. All right, let's go to 25. 25, if the price of resources used to make a good increases, what happens to our supply curve? So when an input increases in price, this is going to shift our supply curve. This is one of the examples where we have a price change in an input. This is a case where our supply curve will shift, okay? So here's our original supply curve. And so in this situation, when the price of an input increases, it's going to cost more at each quantity. It's going to cost more to supply the good. So this new supply curve is going to be parallel to our original supply curve, but it is going to shift up and to the left. It's going to be parallel once again. That's a big important point because at each price bundle, so say this is price $3. At $3, I had this original bundle of my quantity down here. But now at $3 for this supply, I know that I'm getting a lot less. I'm actually at $3, I can't even buy one good in my new supply curve because of that increased price, okay? Number 26, an equilibrium in the market for a good consists of price and quantity. At what point? So we know we find that equilibrium at the point where supply and demand cross. And at that point where our supply and demand curves cross, quantity supplied is also going to equal our quantity demanded. In this case, C is going to be the only correct answer and the only acceptable answer for this. All right. If both supply and demand for a good increase, what can we conclude about our new equilibrium? So let's just draw this one out. Yeah, let's draw this one out quick. So if we have an original supply curve and an original demand curve, let's label them. Let's say supply one and demand one. All right. And so at our original equilibrium, we're going to have a price right here. And we're going to have a quantity right here. Okay. So when my supply and demand now increase, we're going to do a rightward shift. Oops. We're going to see a rightward shift in that supply curve. So let's increase that supply. So here is our second supply. Once again, this second supply curve is going to be parallel to the first, but we're going to increase supply at each given point. So supply increases and our demand is also going to increase, meaning we're going to see a shift this direction for our second demand curve. All right, so now our new equilibrium where supply 2 and demand 2 meet is going to be out here. So I know these changes in like the amounts that the supply and demand curves change is ambiguous, but I can still tell now that in this case, my quantity is going to be higher. No matter what, my quantity is always going to be higher. So B is going to be the only answer that makes sense. The new equilibrium will produce at a higher quantity. The new equilibrium will have a lower price. The answer for that is no. No matter how you draw that, we will never have a lower price. When supply and demand increase, well, I guess that's not true. When demand increases, we're going to see that price increase. When supply increases, we'll see that price decrease. So it actually depends on which curve changes more. So like I said, B is going to be the only answer that is accurate every single time. So whenever we see supply and demand increase like this, no matter how much each supply and demand increase, we're always going to have a higher quantity. We are always producing at this higher quantity. There is no denying that right here. Actually, there's no denying that this right here is going to have a higher quantity. We're producing at a higher new quantity. All right, clear those. Go to our next, number 28. The supply of a good increases. What does this do? Once again, let's just draw this out real quick and we can answer that pretty easily. When we see the supply of a good increase, okay, now, okay, so here's our original supply curve. We'll say supply 1. And then we'll say supply 2. So as my supply increases, I am shifting outwards or to the right. So I'm shifting this way. So what's happening now with my equilibrium? So here's my demand curve. So my original equilibrium was right here. Now my equilibrium's down here. So because of that shift in supply, I'm now at a higher quantity down here, and I'm also at a lower price. So in this case, the price will decrease, the quantity will increase. All it takes is a simple sketch just like that to go through and figure out that that is what's going to happen when we see that supply curve increase. All right, consumer and producer surplus are going to represent these gains from trade. We talked about that in question 1, that in any voluntary trade, both parties are going to be better off afterwards. So this consumer and producer surplus are going to represent that extra value created within a trade, anything above and beyond that willingness to pay. So if I'm a consumer and I'm ready to spend up to $50 on a pair of sneakers, and I get a pair of sneakers on sale for $30, that extra consumer surplus is going to be that $20 that I saved that I still would have spent on those sneakers, but I saved that money. So that is those gains from trade, okay? And lastly, number 30, consumer and producer surplus are maximized when trades occur between who? So as we just said, that consumer surplus is going to be the difference between what I'm willing to pay and what I actually pay. And then same with producers. Producer surplus is going to be the cost of production, the actual cost of production versus what I was willing to put into that production and what I'm willing to sell for. So in order to maximize these gains from trade, I want the highest value consumer to be getting this product. When I have a high value consumer, their willingness to pay is higher than anyone else. Their willingness to pay is greater than anyone else because their use for whatever good this may be must be very valuable to them. So we want the highest value consumers and the lowest cost producers to be making this trade. And when we have these two types of consumer and producer, the low cost producer and the high value consumer, we are maximizing that surplus, okay? We are maximizing that surplus because producers are going to make a higher profit, and those high value consumers are going to get a very large consumer surplus if our willingness to pay is much higher than the market price. Okay, and so that is when we are maximizing these surpluses. All right, so let's move on and discuss the extended response questions a little bit. So for this first multiple choice question, where I asked about what practices and institutions do we have now compared to early history that makes trade possible for people? So a few of those could be the internet, it could be the banking system, it could be the World Bank, it could be government systems, it could be, I could have accepted a lot of answers here. It could have been language. So all of these institutions that we talked about this early semester have helped trade. It has helped trade evolve and grow over time. So the answer for what changed that made trade appealing rather than worrying about protecting one's own goods, that I wanted to kind of get at that idea of property rights again. So when we have property rights, we know we are secure. Our goods, our services that we provide are secured by some legal system. They're enforced by some policy. So in that case, what changed that made trade appealing? People had secured rights, okay? So they had the right to not have their items and goods stolen from them in this case. So now people are able to advertise. People are able to say like, hey, come to this and this location and I'll trade you this and this for however much. So because of those property rights, people are able to advertise freely. They're able to share their products and entice these consumers. All right. All right, so drawing the graph for each of these three events, let's go through and I will draw each of the graphs and exactly what I was looking for. All right, I'm gonna pause the recording while I draw these. All right, so for this first one, we have our original supply and demand curves here and our original equilibrium at this quantity and this price. So one thing I like to see when I am grading is that P star labeling that equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. So I like to see that P star, Q star. And so when I see that supply curve shift up into the left, because of that price of an input increasing, we know the price of an input is going to affect supply, not demand. So we're going to see a supply shift. So our supply curve moves from here to here. And now our new equilibrium is going to be at this point. This quantity and this new price. Well, down a little bit. All right, so our new equilibrium quantity is here and our new equilibrium price is going to be there. All right, so that's the shift I wanted to see. What happens to our equilibrium? Once again, our quantity is going to decrease, price is going to increase because that input is becoming more scarce, more expensive for supply. Suppliers are going to have to raise that price, that market price. So that is what's going to happen. We'll shift out at our original equilibrium up to this equilibrium, okay? All right, so moving on. Number two, the price of milk increases. What happens to the equilibrium for alternative milk beverages? So for this question, my big thing was I wanted to see if you guys understood what substitutes were and complement goods. So in this question, we want to look at the alternative milk market. So we look at the price of milk. We know milk and alternative milk beverages are going to be substitute goods. So when the price of one increases, the demand for the other is going to increase as well. People are not going to want to pay that higher price of milk. So they'll switch over to alternative milk beverages, meaning this is going to be a demand change, okay? So when we see that price of milk increase, we are going to have more consumers enter this alternative milk market, meaning when that population increases, we're going to see an increase in that demand. So drawing that out, here is what that is going to look like. We have our original supply and demand curves. And once again, I like to see that original equilibrium would be right here. And that original equilibrium price is going to be over here. So this is P star and Q star. These are very sloppily drawn. I'd like to see all this labeling. I like to see each axis labeled when I'm grading. All right. So once again, when the price of milk increases, we're going to see an increase in demand in that alternative milk market. So our demand curve is going to shift outward. Oops. In this case, okay? We're going to see an outward shift because we have an increase in demand. Let's make this blue and we'll draw. Once again, it's important that these lines are parallel because at every given opportunity or every given solution set on this line, we should be able to compare it to this new demand and we should just see that new high price, okay? Nothing, the slope of it should not change. Nothing else should change, all right? They need to be parallel lines. So my original demand was here. So this was demand 1. So my new demand is going to be here, demand 2. All right. So this new equilibrium, let's talk about that new equilibrium. So when my price of milk increases, I see this alternative milk market. I see quantity increases in this alternative milk market, and I see the price increases for this alternative milk market as well. So price increase and quantity increase for this new equilibrium. So in your answers with a few sentences about this, we could talk about how substitute goods, when we have the price of one increase, the demand for the other increases, and vice versa. When the price of one decreases, the demand for the other is also going to decrease. All right, so this is what I was looking for this question. So moving on, I'm going to clear this. And lastly, this third scenario, the price of gas decreases. What happens to the equilibrium in the market for gas? So in this case, I wasn't even looking for a curve shift. When I see the price increases, all I'm saying is I'm looking for a shift out of equilibrium. So we have our original supply and demand curves. Let's label those out. So supply 1, demand 1. We have quantity and we have price. All right. So my original equilibrium looks to be about right here at this point. All right. So labeling my original equilibrium price and quantity. All right. So here is the graph that we are going to start with. One thing I want to point out when I was grading these graphs, what I want to see when I see these curve shifts, when I see these changes in equilibrium, I want to see what happens first, and then I want to see the change. So I want to start with this alternative milk market, my original supply and demand. So I'm going to show this supply and demand and my original equilibrium points. So then I'm going to go ahead and say the price of gas decreases. What happens? So when my price decreases, once again, price decreasing does not merit a curve shift. A price decreasing is just going to be a change on this y-axis. So our lower price is going to be down here. So now what happens to our equilibrium? Well, we're actually out of equilibrium. We are thrown into a disequilibrium. So when that price decreases, now we have a shortage. We see that my quantity demanded, so this is quantity demanded because it's the where that low price meets on my demand curve, and then my quantity supplied is going to be down here. So at this lower price, what I was hoping you guys would see is that we are thrown out of equilibrium into this disequilibrium. we see we have a shortage because my quantity demanded is greater than my quantity supplied at this low price. At this low price, suppliers are not able to give consumers the amount of product they would like, the quantity of product they would like, okay? Once again, no curve shifts, nothing else going on, just showing that, hey, we are now thrown out of equilibrium into this disequilibrium. All right, so that is it for those questions there. And let's move on to our all right, so after graphing all the points from the table, so I just brought them in to this slide like this. You can rewrite these ordered pairs as such. In the table, all you see is Q and P, but we know that's just our X and Y coordinates. So I graphed all these, and these stars are going to be those points. So drawing my line, my PPF should look something like this. Oops, okay. That last part's pretty ugly, but it'll look something like this, where it's bowing outwards and also is downward sloping. So we want to see point A within the bounds, point B outside the bounds, and point C directly on the curve. So let's start with A right here. Oops. Point A in the bounds. Let's do point B out here. And then point C is going to be right on the line. C here, B here. Okay, so talking about these points A, B, and C, let's start with A. At point A, whatever country this PPF is, whatever country, household, firm, whatever it may be, this PPF at point A is inefficient. Whatever resources are being used inefficiently or not being maximized for their use, their value, okay? This C right here, this point C showing right on the bounds at quantity of 24, price of 30, or price of 30. When we see that, okay, so first off, actually, it's not necessarily Q and P, goods 1 and 2. So anything right directly on that line, everything is being maximized. All resources are being fully employed, and we are producing the exact amount we would desire. We are producing that maximum amount, that maximum output. And then at point B, whatever household, firm, whatever, whoever's PPF this is, at point B, we know without more capital, without more resources, without adding some additional input, this is a totally impossible, infeasible point, okay? This is not going to ever happen unless we see some kind of maybe technological increase, maybe a technological innovation, and then we could see the PPF increase like that, like so, where maybe it does go through that in that infeasible line, that infeasible point, if we were to see some increase in technology, some increase in productivity. But at this point, when our PPF line is drawn down here, this point B is just absolutely unattainable, okay? So with all that being said, I think that wraps up exam 1. If there are any questions, please let me know. I apologize for this video being so late. Thank you for being patient with me, and stay tuned for the next. Thanks, guys.